Why did my principal involve CPS when I missed school for my dad's military deployment ceremony? The CPS investigator asked my little brother to lift his shirt. He was 7 years old, standing in our living room, tears streaming down his face while a stranger examined his body for bruises that didn't exist. My mother stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her hand pressed against her mouth, still wearing the gold star pin she'd gotten at the deployment ceremony 12 hours earlier. The investigator's name was Denise Kowalski, and she had the decency to look uncomfortable as she documented that my brother's only visible mark was a scraped knee from falling off his bicycle 3 weeks ago. I was 15 years old, and I had already learned that some people will burn down your entire life over a single day of missed school. What I didn't know yet was that Principal Gretchen Holloway had been waiting for an excuse to destroy my family since before I was even born. My father, Staff Sergeant David Reyes, had served 18 years in the Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, countless training deployments that kept him away for weeks or months at a time. He was being deployed to Kuwait for 9 months, and his unit's departure ceremony was scheduled for October 15th at Fort Liberty. The ceremony started at 10 in the morning, which meant I would miss a full day of school. My mother, Angela Reyes, had submitted the absence request 2 weeks in advance, following every protocol the district required. She included a copy of my father's deployment orders, a letter from his commanding officer confirming the date and time, and a personal note explaining that this might be the last time our family would be together for nearly a year. The attendance office approved the absence. They sent back a form with a signature and a stamp. We thought everything was handled. The ceremony was beautiful and devastating in equal measure. 300 soldiers standing in formation on a field while their families watched from aluminum bleachers. My little brother Mateo sat on my mother's lap, too young to understand why everyone was crying, but old enough to sense that something important was happening. I held my father's deployment flag in my hands, the one he'd given me when I was 8 years old before his second tour. He always let me keep it while he was gone, a physical reminder that he was coming back. The commanding general gave a speech about duty and sacrifice. The chaplain said a prayer. Then the soldiers were released to say their final goodbyes, and my father walked toward us with that steady, measured stride that military service had permanently embedded in his posture. He hugged Mateo first, then my mother, then me. He smelled like boot polish and the sandalwood cologne he always wore. He told me to take care of everyone while he was gone. I promised I would. I had no idea that the real battle would start the moment he left American soil. I returned to school on the 16th, expecting nothing more than the usual pile of makeup work. Instead, my homeroom teacher handed me a yellow slip instructing me to report to the principal's office immediately. The walk down that hallway felt different than every other time I'd made it. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher. The motivational posters on the walls, the ones with pictures of mountains and words like perseverance and integrity, felt like they were mocking me. Principal Holloway's secretary, a woman named Vivian who had always been kind to me, wouldn't meet my eyes when I approached her desk. She just pointed toward the closed office door and said the principal was expecting me. I knocked twice. A voice told me to enter. I pushed open the door and found Principal Holloway sitting behind her desk with her hands folded, and a man I'd never seen before sitting in one of the chairs facing her. He was wearing a lanyard with a county ID badge. The badge said Department of Social Services. Principal Holloway didn't offer me a seat. She let me stand there, 15 years old and already confused, while she explained that my unapproved absence had triggered an automatic truancy report. I tried to interrupt, tried to explain that the absence had been approved, that we had submitted all the paperwork, that my father was literally on a military transport heading overseas right now. She held up her hand like she was stopping traffic. She said the absence request had been denied due to insufficient documentation. She said my mother had been notified of this denial via email 3 days before the ceremony. She said that because my mother had taken me out of school anyway, knowing the absence was unauthorized, this constituted educational neglect. The man from social services nodded along like everything she was saying made perfect sense. My hands started shaking. I looked at her computer screen, trying to see if there was any record of the emails she claimed to have sent. She tilted the monitor away from me. The investigation moved faster than I thought possible. Denise Kowalski, the CPS caseworker assigned to our family, arrived at our house that same evening. She was required to conduct an immediate home visit due to the nature of the allegation. Educational neglect. The word sounded clinical and damning at the same time. My mother showed her the approval email from the attendance office, the one with the signature and stamp. Denise took a photograph of it with her phone. She explained that she would need to verify this documentation with the school, that she had already received a different version of events from Principal Holloway. My mother's face went pale. She asked what different version. Denise said she wasn't at liberty to share details of the complaint, but that the principal had expressed concerns about ongoing educational neglect and possible instability in the home environment. Possible instability. My father had been gone for less than 24 hours, and already someone was suggesting our home was falling apart. My mother called the school first thing the next morning. The attendance office had no record of denying our absence request. The secretary who worked there, a woman named Paula Whitfield, confirmed that she had personally processed the approval and sent the confirmation email. She still had it in her sent folder. She forwarded it to my mother while they were on the phone together. Two emails now existed, one approving the absence, one apparently denying it, both supposedly sent from the same office on the same day. My mother asked to speak with Principal Holloway directly. Paula said the principal was in meetings all day. My mother asked to schedule an appointment. Paula said the earliest available slot was 3 weeks away. My mother said this was urgent, that there was a CPS investigation based on false information. Paula lowered her voice and said she wasn't supposed to tell us this, but we should probably get a lawyer. Then she hung up. The lawyer we found was named Bernard Okonkwo, a former JAG officer who specialized in education law and military family advocacy. He charged $200 for an initial consultation, money my mother pulled from our emergency fund while my father flew somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean with no cell service and no idea what was happening. Bernard listened to everything my mother told him. He examined the approval email, the alleged denial email Principal Holloway claimed to have sent, and the CPS intake report that Denise Kowalski had provided during her home visit. His face did something complicated as he read through the documents. Finally, he looked up and said that the denial email had metadata inconsistencies. The timestamp showed it was created at 4 a.m, 3 days before the ceremony. No school administrator was working at 4 a.m. The email had been backdated. Someone had fabricated evidence to make our family look negligent. Bernard filed an emergency motion with the school district requesting all correspondence related to my absence request. He also filed a complaint with the State Department of Education alleging administrative misconduct. He warned my mother that these processes would take time, that the wheels of bureaucracy moved slowly, and that in the meantime, we needed to cooperate fully with the CPS investigation to demonstrate that we had nothing to hide. My mother asked how long we would have to live with investigators watching our every move. Bernard said he'd seen cases like this resolve in weeks. He'd also seen them drag on for months. It depended on how determined the principal was to pursue her narrative. My mother asked why a principal would fabricate evidence against a military family. Bernard got quiet for a moment. Then he asked if my mother knew anyone named Gretchen Holloway before she became the school principal. My mother said no. Bernard said he would do some research. The next 2 weeks were a careful performance of normalcy. I went to school every day, turned in every assignment on time, and kept my head down in the hallways. Principal Holloway watched me constantly. I could feel her eyes on me during assemblies, during lunch, during the 3 minutes between classes when I walked past her office door. She never spoke to me directly, but she didn't have to. Her presence was a reminder that she had power over my family and she was choosing to use it. My teachers treated me differently too. Most of them were sympathetic once word got around that my father had deployed, but a few seemed to have received instructions from somewhere. My English teacher, Mr. Kavanaugh, started calling on me constantly, asking me questions about readings I hadn't been assigned, marking me wrong when my answers didn't match his expectations. My guidance counselor scheduled 3 mandatory check-ins in 1 week, asking me pointed questions about my home life, my mother's mental health, my feelings about my father's absence. I answered everything carefully, knowing that anything I said could end up in a report. The CPS investigation expanded. Denise Kowalski explained during her second home visit that she had received additional information suggesting a pattern of educational neglect. She asked my mother to provide attendance records for both me and my brother going back 3 years. She asked about doctor's appointments, sick days, family emergencies. She asked about my father's deployment schedule and whether his frequent absences contributed to instability at home. My mother provided everything she asked for. Our attendance records were exemplary. I had missed 4 days of school in 3 years, all documented and approved. Mateo had missed 2 days, both for strep throat confirmed by a pediatrician. Denise nodded and took notes. She said she would need to verify this information with the school district. She said there were discrepancies between what we were telling her and what she had been told by school officials. She wouldn't say what the discrepancies were. She wouldn't say who was making these additional reports. She just kept asking questions and writing things down. My mother finally reached my father via satellite phone on the 18th day of the investigation. The connection was terrible, full of static and delays, and she only had 15 minutes to explain that CPS was investigating our family for educational neglect based on fabricated evidence from my school principal. My father's voice came through broken but clear enough to understand. He asked if we were safe. My mother said yes. He asked if we had a lawyer. My mother said yes. He asked if there was anything he could do from 8,000 miles away. My mother started crying. She said she didn't know. She said she felt like she was fighting a ghost, that every time she provided evidence of our innocence, someone manufactured new reasons to doubt us. My father said he would contact his commanding officer, that there might be resources through military family services that could help. The line went dead before he could say goodbye. Bernard Okonkwo called 3 days later with information that changed everything. He had done the research he promised. Gretchen Holloway had grown up in our town, graduated from the same high school I now attended. Her maiden name was Gretchen Albright. In 1992, she had been engaged to a man named Thomas Reyes. Thomas Reyes was my father's older brother. The engagement ended badly. According to courthouse records Bernard had uncovered, Gretchen had filed a restraining order against Thomas after the breakup, alleging harassment and threats. The restraining order was denied due to insufficient evidence. Thomas moved to California a year later and eventually died in a car accident in 2001. Gretchen married a man named Harold Holloway, got her education degree, and returned to our town 15 years later as a school administrator. She had been principal at my school for 4 years. She had watched me walk through her hallways every day, knowing exactly whose daughter I was. The revelation felt like being submerged in cold water. My principal had spent 4 years waiting for an opportunity to punish my family for something that happened before I was born. My father didn't even know his brother had been engaged. He and Thomas had been estranged since childhood, raised by different relatives after their parents' divorce. My father knew almost nothing about Thomas's life except that he had died young and alone in California. But Gretchen Holloway remembered. She had been carrying this grudge for over 30 years, and when my father deployed and my mother submitted an absence request for a ceremony that would have been approved by any reasonable administrator, she saw her chance. She didn't just deny the request. She fabricated evidence. She filed a false report with CPS. She tried to have my family investigated for crimes we never committed because she was still angry at a dead man who shared my last name. Bernard filed an amended complaint with the School District Board of Education, now including evidence of the principal's personal connection to my family and potential bias. He also filed a complaint with the State Licensing Board alleging professional misconduct. These documents became public record. Within days, a local journalist named Mariana Solis reached out to my mother asking for comment on a story she was writing about a school administrator accused of targeting a military family. My mother consulted with Bernard before responding. He said going public was risky, but might force faster action from the bureaucratic systems that had been protecting the principal. My mother gave Mariana permission to interview us. She answered questions about the deployment ceremony, the fabricated denial email, the CPS investigation, and the 30-year-old connection between our family and Gretchen Holloway. Mariana recorded everything on her phone with a voice memo app. She said the story would run in Sunday's paper. The Friday before the article was scheduled to publish, Principal Holloway called an emergency parent meeting at the school. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Bernard advised my mother to attend and document everything. She brought me along, sitting in the back row of the gymnasium while Principal Holloway stood at a podium and addressed a confused crowd of parents. She said there had been a coordinated attack on her character by a family with connections to military lawyers. She said she was being targeted because she had done her job and reported legitimate concerns about a student's welfare. She said the media was spreading lies to generate clicks. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. I could feel eyes turning toward me, some sympathetic, most just curious. My mother's hand found mine in the darkness. She squeezed hard enough that I could feel her heartbeat through her fingers. The article dropped 2 days later. Mariana Solis had done her research. She had obtained the metadata analysis of the fabricated denial email through a public records request. She had interviewed Paula Whitfield, the attendance office secretary, who confirmed on the record that the absence had been approved. She had tracked down 3 other families who had experienced similar treatment from Principal Holloway, all of whom had children with connections to people the principal had known in her previous life. One family's child had a grandmother who had testified against Gretchen in the restraining order hearing decades ago. Another family had a connection to Thomas Reyes through a shared employer from the 1990s. The pattern was clear and damning. Gretchen Holloway had been using her position as a school administrator to pursue personal vendettas against families connected to her past. The newspaper ran the story on the front page with the headline, "Principal Accused of Targeting Military Family Over 30-Year Grudge." The school district placed Principal Holloway on administrative leave the Monday after the article published. The CPS investigation into our family was suspended pending review of the original complaint. Denise Kowalski called my mother personally to apologize for what she called an unusual situation. She said her supervisor had reviewed the case file and concluded that the initial complaint appeared to have been made in bad faith. She said the case would likely be closed within 2 weeks. My mother asked if there would be any record of the investigation following me or my brother. Denise said she would recommend full expungement. My mother thanked her, and her voice broke on the second syllable. She had been holding herself together for almost a month, maintaining the performance of strength and calm that military spouses learn out of necessity. The moment she hung up the phone, she collapsed onto the kitchen floor and sobbed into her hands. I sat down beside her. I put my arm around her shoulders. I didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would undo what had happened. My father was still 8,000 miles away. Our family had been investigated by Child Protective Services because a woman holding a decades-old grudge had decided to use her authority as a weapon. Even though we were being cleared, even though the principal was being held accountable, the experience had left marks that wouldn't fade. I had learned that systems designed to protect children could be weaponized against families. I had learned that someone could smile at you in a hallway every day while planning your destruction. I had learned that my last name connected me to history I didn't know and couldn't control. My mother eventually stopped crying. She wiped her face and looked at me and said we needed to make dinner. Normalcy was the only thing we had left to cling to. The formal investigation into Principal Holloway took another 3 months. The school district hired an independent investigator named Douglas Yamamoto, a former FBI agent who specialized in institutional misconduct. He interviewed everyone involved: Paula Whitfield, Denise Kowalski, my mother, me, the 3 other families Mariana had identified in her article, and dozens of staff members who had worked under Principal Holloway over the years. He obtained server logs from the school's email system, proving that the denial email had been created and backdated days after the original approval had been sent. He found evidence that Principal Holloway had accessed the attendance database herself to modify my records, something administrators were not supposed to do without oversight. He documented a pattern of behavior spanning her entire tenure at the school: manipulated records, fabricated incidents, selective enforcement of rules against students whose families she had personal grievances with. Douglas Yamamoto submitted his final report to the school board in February. The board voted unanimously to terminate Gretchen Holloway's employment and refer the matter to local prosecutors for potential criminal charges. 2 weeks later, the county district attorney's office announced that they were filing charges of official misconduct and filing false reports against Holloway. If convicted, she faced up to 4 years in prison. She was arrested on a Thursday morning at her home. The local news ran footage of her being led to a police car in handcuffs, her face hidden behind sunglasses and her hair unwashed. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the consequences of her own choices. I watched the footage on my phone during lunch period. The cafeteria around me buzzed with conversation about what had happened. Everyone had an opinion. Some people thought she deserved worse. Some people thought the whole thing had been blown out of proportion. Nobody asked me what I thought. I preferred it that way. My father came home in June, 3 months earlier than originally scheduled. His commanding officer had expedited his return due to what military paperwork called extraordinary family circumstances. He walked through the airport terminal with his duffel bag over his shoulder and his deployment flag rolled up under his arm, the same flag he had given me before he left. He saw us waiting at the arrivals gate. Mateo broke free from my mother's grip and ran toward him, and my father dropped everything to catch him. He lifted my brother high into the air and held him there for a long moment before putting him down and reaching for my mother. They held each other without speaking. I stood back, giving them space, until my father looked up and held out his arm. I stepped into the embrace. His chest rose and fell against my cheek. He smelled like recycled airplane air and military-issue soap. He whispered that he was proud of me. He said he had read Bernard's reports and Mariana's articles. He said I had protected our family while he was gone. I wanted to tell him that I had only done what he taught me, but the words got stuck somewhere in my throat. Gretchen Holloway's trial happened in September. She pleaded not guilty and tried to argue that she had been acting on legitimate concerns about student welfare. Her defense attorney painted my family as aggressive and vindictive, suggesting that we had manipulated the narrative to destroy an innocent educator's career. Douglas Yamamoto testified for 3 hours about the evidence he had collected. Paula Whitfield testified about the approval email and the principal's unusual behavior in the days after the ceremony. My mother testified about the impact of the investigation on our family, her voice steady and clear even when the defense attorney tried to rattle her. I was called as a witness too. I described what it felt like to stand in that office while a stranger from CPS was invited to validate false accusations against my family. I described watching my little brother lift his shirt for an investigator. I described the way Principal Holloway had watched me in the hallways, knowing what she was doing to us. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced in November to 18 months in prison and 5 years of supervised probation. Her teaching license was permanently revoked. She would never work with children again. The judge, a woman named Patricia Reeves who had served on the bench for 22 years, said during sentencing that Holloway's conduct represented one of the most disturbing abuses of institutional power she had ever seen. She said the defendant had weaponized systems designed to protect vulnerable children in order to pursue a personal grudge against a military family. She said the impact of such betrayal extended far beyond the immediate victims. She said other families would now hesitate to report legitimate concerns, afraid of being treated the way my family had been treated. The damage to public trust in schools and child protective services was incalculable. Holloway stood silently through the entire statement. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she shook her head once and stared at the floor. I graduated from high school 3 years later. My father was there, in his dress uniform, sitting in the front row with my mother and Mateo. The new principal, a man named Franklin Dupree, who had been brought in specifically to repair the damage Holloway had done, called my name and handed me my diploma. I shook his hand and posed for the photograph and walked back to my seat. The gymnasium smelled like nervous sweat and cheap flowers. The valedictorian gave a speech about new beginnings and unlimited potential. I thought about Denise Kowalski asking my brother to lift his shirt. I thought about Paula Whitfield lowering her voice and telling us to get a lawyer. I thought about Bernard Okonkwo discovering a 30-year-old connection that explained everything. I thought about Mariana Solis running a story that forced accountability. I thought about Douglas Yamamoto documenting patterns of abuse that had been invisible for years. I thought about all the people who had helped my family survive something that never should have happened. After the ceremony, we went out for dinner at a restaurant my father loved, a little Italian place near the army base where he had proposed to my mother 20 years earlier. Mateo was 10 now, old enough to understand most of what had happened and young enough to have been mostly protected from the worst of it. He asked if he could have dessert before dinner. My mother said no. My father said yes. They looked at each other and laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from years of practicing compromise. I watched them and felt something shift in my chest. Our family had been through something that should have broken us apart. A woman with power and a grudge had tried to destroy us. Instead, she had destroyed herself, and we were still here, still together, still laughing over arguments about dessert. The scars remained. I still flinched sometimes when I saw police cars or official-looking letters in the mail. I still had dreams where CPS investigators showed up at our door demanding to see my brother's body. But the scars were healing. Slowly. Imperfectly. The way real healing always happens. I'm 23 now. I work as a paralegal at a law firm that specializes in military family advocacy, the same firm where Bernard Okonkwo still practices. I help families like mine navigate the systems that are supposed to protect them but sometimes become weapons instead. I've seen cases similar to ours, administrators and officials who abuse their positions to settle personal scores. I've seen good people defeated by bureaucracy and bad people protected by procedures. I've also seen families who won, who documented everything and found allies and fought until the truth came out. Those are the cases I think about when the work gets hard. Those are the stories that remind me why this matters. Bernard says I have a gift for finding the patterns, for seeing the connections that other people miss. He says I learned it the hard way, by living through a case that nobody should have had to endure. He's probably right. Trauma teaches things that no textbook can. My father retired from the Army last year after 24 years of service. His final ceremony was at the same field where he had deployed to Kuwait, the deployment that started everything. My mother and Mateo and I sat in the same aluminum bleachers where we had sat 9 years earlier. The commanding general gave a speech about duty and sacrifice. The chaplain said a prayer. Then my father walked toward us with that steady, measured stride, and I handed him his deployment flag for the last time. He folded it carefully and tucked it under his arm. He said he was finally coming home for good. I believed him. We had survived too much to doubt each other now. As we walked toward the parking lot, I looked back at the field one last time. A new formation of soldiers was assembling, preparing for their own deployment ceremony. Somewhere in that crowd was another family getting ready to say goodbye. I hoped their principal would be kinder than mine. I hoped they would never need to learn what we had learned. But if they did, I hoped they would find people like Bernard and Mariana and Douglas and Paula. I hoped they would fight. I hoped they would win. Gretchen Holloway was released from prison last spring after serving 14 months of her 18-month sentence. I know because Bernard tracked her through the system, the same way he tracks all the people who have hurt his clients. She moved to another state somewhere in the Midwest where nobody knows her name or her history. She's not allowed to work with children. She's not allowed to contact my family. She spent 30 years nursing a grudge against people who had nothing to do with her pain, and she lost everything for it. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about what she did. Sometimes I wonder if she feels remorse or just resentment at getting caught. I'll probably never know. I've decided it doesn't matter. Her feelings are not my responsibility. Her consequences are not my concern. The only thing I can control is what I do with the story she tried to write for me. She wanted me to be a victim. I became an advocate instead. She wanted my family to fall apart. We're still standing. That's the only ending that matters. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.